radio guys I have done interviews with myself, and he did a whole series of interviews, many of which were not ever published as far as I know, and he's in the process of bringing them out. McKenna's work is seminal. It is beyond anything that Einstein ever could have come up with. It steps us out of the single state of consciousness. In my youth, when my body was at that particular time, I also experimented with the psychotropic substances in some significant level. And while I didn't go to the Amazon to do it, I've had those same kind of experiences that Terence McKenna had, and never thought to ever connect the I Ching to a timeline as a result.
It's awesome.
So he was able. It is. It's truly fantastic. I tend not to look at his work while I'm doing interpretation because I don't want to be front-loading my own view of things. But his work, I believe, is accurate. I believe it has been seriously mischaracterized. His insight that he came back with from these journeys to the other dimension is on the order of a Volkswagen van, a Vanagon, okay? And when I've gone, I've been able to bring back the Volkswagen Bug and maybe a couple of dune buggies that have been altered from that bug, but never quite to level of insight that he had. Nonetheless, though, his process is extremely valid, and the suffering that he and his brother went through to bring this back to us has never been lionized the way it should. End of statement.
The third question. Do you and the bots have any leads on the indigenous tribes, for example, the Maya, the Hopi, Don Alejandro, John Valo, Melchizedek, who appears to be, who is representing what they say, the famous calendar, and the Mayan revelations? End of question.
We do, and it's gained in over the past 4 or 5 years, but I have a tendency to look at the stuff that I first discovered in 97 and 98 as being more pure before the whole 2012 issue started hitting mainstream and the mainstream debunkers and analysis that one might find on TV. So I have a lot of that actually came out in 97 and 98 in a database that I preserved because it was just so unusual and interesting. And I was aware even then of the Mayan calendar, although I didn't particularly give it much credence because the end date was so far away. I never really thought about it that much. But in 97 or 98, I kept getting this series of archetypes that I at one point I labeled "The Return" with the article "the" in capitals, because it appeared as though it was describing a returning condition or a revisiting. As opposed to something entirely new, if that makes sense. And it was at that point that I started thinking, oh, maybe this was discussing the Planet X kind of thing. 2 or 3 years later, when the Planet X stuff started taking a big jump into the internet, I thought, well, perhaps this 97 warning or data coming out was about that. However, now I'm quite sure that it's talking about that I probably shouldn't have labeled it as the return, but rather as the capture. And or the seizure or the melding or something along those lines. It's not a negative, but rather the word set I would use now is a joining. And the condition has been, we've been there before, but we've never bonded to it, if you can say it that way. Whatever it is, the data that we have now seems to suggest, all the way back from 97, seems to point to a period of time that we'll go through that no other level of, if we survive it and come out and do well, so to speak, humanity will not have to go through this test again. In other words, what I think is actually occurring is not only or not merely the cyclical returning to certain areas in space or the cyclical unwinding of certain conditions, but rather actually represents humanity at the bottom of a step. And if we are able to take that step, knowingly, eyes open, as sovereign individuals facing it all, and if we take that step, then we're off on an entirely different adventure. If we're not able to take that step, then universe will provide humanity trials, tribulations to grow, and will eventually get us back to where we face the bottom of that step again. And one way to look at it could be that we are at civilization level 0,0, and we have the opportunity to take the step and become a level 1 civilization, which would be pan solar system and reaching out into the galaxy and beyond. So at a material level, I think that is one of the ways in which it's going to manifest. That we are at the bottom of that step, and it's up to us to actually lift our feet and get up there. If enough of us can see the step, then we can do so. Make sense? End of statement.
That makes a lot of sense. That's a fantastically eloquent answer. Thank you very much for that. Now, one last one, a little bit more mathematical. I'm hoping you'll be able to shed some light on this. I'm no mathematician, or I'm a musician, they're similar. We currently work in base 10 mathematics, as far as I understand it. And I've heard that we might be better off working in base 12. Can you talk about this and the implications of this for pi, which is something I only grasp the understanding, but I do understand it. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. As a programmer, I actually don't work that often in base base 10. Usually, I'm working mathematically in hexadecimal at a base 16, or in ASCII, which is fundamentally a base 60 code. And as I translate words, and that's been shifted up to 256 characters with Unicode. So there is a whole lot of knowledge that comes through by not restricting yourself to base 10. However, I think that the differences are interesting and enlightening as you go through them, but an even greater level of mathematical understanding comes out of actually merging mathematics with music theory and going into string thought. And in that level of thought, one no longer attempts to reconcile the irrational numbers down to an approximation in a base 10. So in other words, who really cares what the numeric value of the irrational number of the square root of 5 might be? It is much more important and enlightening to be able to just use it as the square root of 5 and deal with the irrational number set, understanding them to be much more powerful and a bigger tool than one finds in rational numbers. End of statement. Make sense?
Very, very well said. Thank you so much. Okay, this is Michael again, and I'm now resuming a new line of inquiries from other friends that had posted questions ahead of time in our little zone forum network, and then new other additional lines of questions if you're ready. So this first one seems a little bit off message at first, but it's really not, and it comes from a friend who's actually here with us. That's Ross. That's this quote that we had by James from the Wingmakers. So I read just a quick intro, which is that the desire for more information and knowledge is a very powerful addiction of the human mind system. And then James of Wingmakers says, quote, I would advise that you turn your attention from the acquisition of information and knowledge and apportion it to the application of the heart virtues to yourself and all others within your local multiverse. And then simply listen to your breath, and each time you turn your attention to your breath, lean a little closer to the being inside you in the centermost point of your existence. End quote, and so on. And so this leads to a line of thought that just today I myself posted by Krishnamurti, who said we're really accumulators of knowledge, and by accumulating books, knowledge of books, quoting them, etc., we don't really go that far. So I just made this quick intro because now I'm going to go on to a new line of issues that are very mundane, and we just want to do this anyway as a discussion, as a conversation, maybe less than question and answer, simply because it is relevant to some of us here in this room, and I know for sure it's relevant to clients of mine, friends, others out there in the world. And these topics are just as mundane as economy and earth changes. So the first question is from Johnny here with us. What does your data suggest, or what is your personal take on the economic collapse in Scandinavia and Sweden in particular? Also, since the Baltic is an important vehicle for the economy in this region, what does your data suggest about earth changes in the area around the Baltic Sea in terms of the sea itself and the coastline? End of question.
Yes, the area of Scandinavia to a certain extent is isolated from the core of the collapse of the Anglo-American Empire. The maintenance of the Scandinavian currencies, even as they are separate slightly from the euro, is going to hold that amount of damage in abeyance. So let me put it another way. The more intense the bonding between any outlying province and the banking structure of the central empire, the worse it will be for that outlying province, as we saw in the case of the collapse of the currency and the social unrest in the rather staid and laid-back population of Iceland recently. So there is that as a warning. The American and Anglo-American Empire, what we think of as the central bank and warfare model of human existence, is dying. Whether any of us do anything about it or not, it will die. Its process of death is predetermined by its process of beginning, and the fact that we're at that end of dozens and dozens of cycles, which include the cycles that support that level of infrastructure. In addition to that, we have the problems that for that paradigm, the central bank and warfare model, it has run into a whole series of issues relative to the internet and the spread of knowledge about its even mere existence. So it's been pretty much predetermined. The collapse of it is going to be very horrific for the country that I'm in now, and will be less so actually for the Scandinavian countries, including, say, from even perhaps Holland, but certainly Denmark north, all over to Finland and into Russia. The resources that are available for the Scandinavian countries, and actually let's just say the northern part of the planet, and the climatic changes that we're going to undergo are going to bond and juxtapose and create actually a fairly bright future for those areas. Once the domination of this central bank and warfare model crumbles and the inventiveness and the initiative of the populations are let loose. We have to understand that the central bank and warfare model extends to a level of mind control that is truly staggering, where these individuals are attempting to warp history, deny knowledge in huge amounts to everybody on the planet, and keep everything that they can possibly keep hidden only to themselves. Once we see the actual fracturing of the financial structure that gives them power, then some of the other areas of their control will break as well, and we'll see certain areas of the planet become, in our data, it shows certain areas of the planet becoming very much as though productivity has been stepped upon for centuries and it's suddenly let loose. And the areas will extend in the entire northern region. There is going to be a bond that will extend from Siberia all the way across the planet into Canada and bond all of those peoples and nations together. And they will join with people at the other end of the planet, that is to say in South Africa and South America, and produce some truly amazing things relative to the new electrics. That's actually the hotbed, so to speak, of the new electrics that we see coming out. It appears to be a level of knowledge and understanding, plus a certain level of crystalline components that are in the far north that don't exist in the main temperate zones. And I don't know what those crystalline components are just yet. We don't have any definitive answer on that, as well as the ability of those individuals in that structure to reorganize themselves after the collapse. And that's a big issue. We don't really have a lot of time to devote to that, but the very nature of the people that are living in Scandinavia, in spite of the fact of recent immigration and the alteration of